meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Well, Joey and Sadie, I am so happy to have you here with us. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, you both have a ton of education. You can tell that learning is a real big value for you. Lots of training, experience, and counseling and mentoring and educating others in really a variety of areas. For you, Sadie, just some of those things include trauma-informed therapy, family and marriage counseling. Joey, you're a seminary professor, you're an author and a speaker. And you guys have 5 children, including one who was adopted through foster care. And also you fostered teens and children of really all ages. So one aspect of your story that I find very unique is that you were elementary school sweethearts. So you have literally been together since you were children.
That's right.
We were class favorites in first grade, even.
Wow.
So we got a photo to prove it.
That is so fun. That is so fun. Well, before we dive in, I would love for you to add anything else that you feel like would provide context for our listeners of who you are.
Go ahead.
Yeah. When we started down the road to looking at adoption and foster care, I completely, once we got into that world, God changed my whole trajectory. So the counseling that I did was before that. Okay. So we, once we started, and I feel like when God opened our eyes to the need, of foster care and that whole world, and the more caseworkers we met, relationships we built with our county and different areas, like we couldn't look away. So it's really from that time, which was 2010, then it's really changed our whole trajectory. So
yeah, God has a way of doing that, doesn't he?
I'm adopted as well. In fact, going back to elementary school sweetheart, my mother and her mother worked in first grade together. And when my mom got the call to come and pick me up to adopt me, the very first person that she told was my future mother-in-law. And so not only have we been together since first grade, but for as long as we can remember, we've had a heart to adopt and do foster care. We don't remember a specific time where we said that, but it's always kind of been baked into us being a couple.
Wow, that is so cool. So before we get a little deeper into the foster care journey, I have to ask this. So I'm going to ask you, Joey, first. What do you love about Sadie?
Yeah, I love how brilliant she is and also humble. So she's not just the wife of my youth; she's the best friend of my life as well. And so she's very she's very considerate. She's not self-absorbed like I am, and so I love that. And so to go back to the 1980s film, I think You Make Me Want to Be a Better Man. She makes me a better man, and so God in my life and God giving her in my life, as well as our children, have helped conform me to the image more than anything else.
Wow. I love that. Thank you. Sadie, what about you?
Joey is the adventure to my calm. So I need that. I need to be pushed out of my comfort zone and, made to hike to the top of the mountain every once in a while. And so Joey is the adventure to my peace and calm. And so I need that to be pushed. And he pushes me to do hard things and that we get to do it together. And so in everything that we've done, ministry and everywhere God's taken us, we've always done it together. So I love that he lets me be a part of everything that he's doing in the church and the classroom, every part of it. And then I get to do that as well.
I love that. Oh, that's wonderful. I think that Clint and I would share similar, though I would be more the one to go out and he's the one to keep us, stable. That's awesome. Okay. So, you said adoption and foster care, you can't really remember when you first figured out that was what you wanted to do. And we know that the journey into foster care, into adoption, into this world is generally not very straightforward. So take us back to how, you talked about you were compelled by just kind of an inner desire. It sounds like God just put that in you. But how did you move forward? How did you take action?
You want to start?
Yeah, it had always been part of our conversation to adopt because Joey was adopted and he had great parents and a great childhood. And so we wanted to adopt as well. And we've lived all over the world, and kind of everywhere we lived, we would start to look into adoption and pursue different avenues, and just never had the peace to move forward. Things would come up, roadblocks, whatever would happen. And so finally,
when she would be ready and I would not be ready, or vice versa.
Yeah, that's right. So it took us a while to kind of get on the same page, and we had not really, because we had lived internationally, that's what we had mainly looked at was international adoption. And it wasn't until we moved back to Arkansas, we were kind of settled and we started hearing more about the need for foster care. And it was kind of a light bulb moment for us, for Joey to say, I think this would be closer to my story. This is where I might have been had my parents not adopted. And so for us, that felt like, that's right. Okay, God, we appreciate that clarity because we have been trying to do this and seek it ourselves. And then he kind of revealed what we were supposed to do. And we started down that path. And at the time that we did adoption in Arkansas, there was no ministry that we could be a part of to do that. So it was a long, we had to really pursue that on our own. I was that squeaky wheel. I put a reminder in my phone every Thursday to contact our caseworker and just see how things were going, just try to get the ball rolling. And so we had to be really proactive with that.
It was good cop, bad cop, because she was a squeaky wheel. She was always angry. Great at the whole system.
One more hoop. But we grew to love our caseworkers, and we know that they are very overworked and underpaid. And so we built relationships with them through that time. And so it was great. We just felt like all along the way, God was confirming that this is what we were supposed to do. So.
That's cool. So, Joey, did your caseworkers grow to love you as well?
But that's usually the case. We did understand that they were underpaid and overworked.
Totally.
But so we joined a program called The Call in Arkansas that was for equipping and recruiting and encouraging foster parents, hopefully to provide what we didn't have when we were going through the program.
That's so cool. And tell me, what year was that when you joined with The Call?
When we went through our first adoption, we the Call it was only in Little Rock in Arkansas, and we called them and we're like, we'll drive to Little Rock to do it, but it was only approved to do it within there. You had to live within that county. And so a couple of years after we adopted, it was maybe about 2015. So maybe about 5 years after we started the process, it was opened up to where it was starting to spread. So we formed a leadership team and went to Little Rock and got training to do that in our county. So
how cool.
Because I have a master's degree in psychology, I was able to go and get certified to do home studies, so I could volunteer to do all the home studies. And we got some other people on board, and we had a team that did that in our county, so that hopefully other people could do the training in the church and part of a community. And we had to drive to do the training because it wasn't offered where we were. So we were trying to bring it more local.
Don't you just love how, like you said, you had your master's in psychology? That was well before, if I'm correct, before you had any idea, right? Oh, yes. I just love that, how God puts all those details in place, and we have no clue how he's going to use that.
Yeah, we were sitting in the training as a leadership team, getting ready to launch the call, and they said, it would be great if you could find someone that has a master's degree in social work or psychology to do your home studies. And I was like, I think I could do that. So, yeah, it was great. It was just God had ordained that long before we were sitting at that table. So
that is so cool.
And the stories that she had from doing those home visits also helped us empathize with those social workers as well.
Sure.
Not all of them were easy. Some of them, she walked into some pretty sketchy places and some funny places as well. Yeah. In Arkansas, there were times where she'd go to houses where there were more dogs than people. And sometimes a chicken or a goat in the house.
Oh, the stories I'm sure you have. I really value the call. Actually, they had put out a video years and years ago, back in 2009, of a little girl waiting in a foster care office while the worker called to find her home. Do you know this video?
Yeah.
Yeah. That video was God used that in an incredible way it was a catalyst for me to walk into our local DCFS and ask about where these kids go. It rocked my whole world. And honestly, it was a huge catalyst to what started the Forgotten Initiative. So I just think that's so cool how God he's using all of us in different ways. And I mean, in my origin story, I tell it every time I talk to someone about TFI. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
So, okay. So how do you feel like your education and your experience that you had prior to all of this, and even the things that I know you've taken some more trainings as you've gotten into foster care, TBRI, trust-based relational intervention.
That's right.
Yeah. And so in more trauma, informed sort of things, how has that helped you personally, or how has it impacted you personally? Like, has there been, maybe a better word is, how has it translated into your personal life as foster parents?
Yeah, as you said in the beginning, we are very much learners and like to research. And I feel like every time we had a kid placed with us that had a new need, that we hadn't seen before, a sensory need, or just, whatever they've come from, it would lead me down this deep path of trying to figure this out. What can I do to best help this child or this family? And that was the catalyst for everything else. And I had, in my master's degree, we had a strong emphasis on attachment theory, and it really transformed how we parent our bio kids. So I already had that background. And at the time, that wasn't really being linked to foster care and adoption. Yeah. But now, the further we go down the road, the more ties that God brings up, because there's more and more coming out about attachment and the needs of kids. And so that I always wanted to try to solve the puzzle. What does this kid need? So,
yeah.
On my first sabbatical, we were in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And one of our children that we had in our home had gender identity, and the other one had reactive attachment disorder. And so overflowing off of her book stands were books about RAD and gender dysphoria and all this.
Yeah.
And, God, what have you brought us into? So we'd much rather be reading Louis L'Amour or something.
L'Amour, yes. That's awesome. I would love you to describe, and I know attachment theory is a whole huge thing, but could you give a Cliff Notes version for people who aren't as familiar? I mean, you said it transformed your parenting. I would love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, when in grad school, the more I started learning about attachment theory, I saw confirmed over and over how that changes. Like the relationship that we have with our caregivers transforms how we give care. And so the more we can know about ourselves and the attachment that we have, the more we can help kids or in all relationships. And it just helps explain so much. And the more I was learning in grad school, like about, we did, the strange situation where the baby is in the room with a stranger and the mom leaves or the caregiver leaves. And so I was involved in a study with that. And I would come home every day saying, I don't know what we have to do. We had no kids at the time. But it was like, we have to be the primary caretaker. We have to do this for attachment. And so I just feel like it's so important to work towards, like, no matter what our past, what we bring in, we can get that earned secure attachment once we realize what's going on and kind of realize the deficits that we have. So it provides hope. Like, it's not ever this is how you were raised. That's the end of the story. This is how you're going to be. Because even through this secular theory of psychology, God uses that to bring hope, because we can fill those holes once we know kind of what we were missing and what kind of relationship we had with our caregiver. We can get that earned security in relationships, and we can pass that on to kids brought into our care. So
that is so important. And what I'm hearing you say is we have to not fix, maybe is the wrong word, but we need to take care of our own issues and know ourselves and what we're missing first before we can, which I think should be in a lot of ways an encouragement to all of us. That's where we talk about self-care, learning, growing, therapy, counseling, like those things are so very important. And it actually will impact our parenting maybe in the most important way we ever could than if we just try to grunt and bear through it, right? And I think that's really, really, I mean, I know the more I know myself and the more that I have grown, it has helped me be a better, I see it. I do see that. Be a better mom.
Yeah, we experienced it ourselves, but also with the foster parents that we worked with, just realizing, wow, I have a lot of gaps and holes. We're broken people in a broken world, working with broken kids. And so that self-evaluation, Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think that we could apply that and translate it to foster care. We need to know ourselves and our own weaknesses, because sometimes our own trauma we can impose on these kids or misread them because it's not them, it's us sometimes.
It's not you, it's me.
That's right. Yes. It's so helpful to know those triggers, like to know that's why when a child does this certain behavior, that's why that makes me feel that way, because I have a past where maybe I felt abandoned or overlooked. And so that, and when we have kids in our care, they know they can easily kind of figure out what buttons to push. Sometimes
they're good at that.
And it's helpful to know our own buttons before we go into that and know kind of what those things bring up for us, and that it's not personal, that they're trying to find their own security and trust and safety. So.
And it's great that we're partnering with it, because when my buttons are starting to be pushed, I can pass the baton like, okay, this is you. I'm out of here.
Definitely. Yeah, that is so important. I do feel that like I'm learning more too when I can just start to feel the grumpiness or where I'm just mad at everybody, or it's like, just go to bed. And this is just a small example, but I feel that when I'm like, kids, I'm going to go into my own room now because I'm not going to be a very nice mommy right now. And it's not you, it's me. So I think that's
running.
important.
To the bed, she would go for a run. And I was always afraid that she was never going to come back. Are you going to run? So, is this going to be like a Forrest Gump type thing? So, I had attachment issues once you went for a run after one of these triggers.
That's awesome. How would you say your faith in Christ has shaped your foster parenting journey specifically?
Yeah, and we grew up in a tradition where first of all, it was about going to heaven rather than hell. And then it became nuanced where it's about your individual relationship with Christ. And those were the focus and the center. But what we learned later on is that the gospel is not just a vertical relationship with Christ, but that vertical relationship with Christ not only suggests but requires us to be. Well, here's an example. We kind of grown up hearing that if anyone wants to follow me, they must take up their cross and deny themselves. And we always do that individually. I need to kill my anger. I need to kill my lust. I need to kill my greed.
Yeah.
But as the more we study Scripture, we realize taking up the cross, although it is good to put to death those things that are part of the sinful nature. But when Jesus talks about this, it's talking about dying for other people. It's not about me dying to my vices, but it's about sacrificing your life for the poor, the outcast, the oppressed. And so the more we're involved in foster care, the more we feel like we're walking through the gospel. And so Sadie works at Project 127 here in Denver. And
Awesome.
It's based on James 1:27, where James, the brother of Jesus, comes and says, hey, whoa, let me tell you what pure and undefiled religion is. And it is about not being sullied by the world, but it's also taking care of orphans and widows. Yeah. And so if that's pure and undefiled religion, then that's what Christ is calling us. And so that individual relationship we have helps us pour ourselves out for those children. And, and of course, as we're pouring ourselves out for them, we're seeing the love of Christ, and it's growing us as well. So
absolutely,
not that we're the great white hope by any nation. We see that by doing that, God is ministering and conforming us to the image of His Son as well.
Yeah.
Add to that.
Yeah. And through all of that, we tried to never lose in the back of our minds that, especially since we've been in Denver and we fostered here, we only had one foster teen that had ever been in a church before. Wow. And so even if they're only with us for a weekend, like this could be the only time that they're in a Christian home. And we have to keep that in the back of our mind, because I don't know how much time God's going to give me with this particular child, but I need to be Jesus for as much time as I have, because they don't know anything about Christianity besides what they see in me. And that's a huge responsibility. And we tried to never lose the gravity of that responsibility we've been given of having a child in our care that we get to show the love of Christ.
It's overwhelming, paralyzing. Anne Lamott said that the two prayers that we should pray is, God, help me, and thank you.
Yes.
We were so dependent. It was just, help me. We realized our own incapacity and just inability to love these kids the way that they deserve to be loved. And so we had to continue to be 100% dependent upon Christ's love overflowing inside of us, and to be apologetic when we failed to be that can do it. Yeah.
And moment by moment dependence, that's what it's all about. I mean, that's when life is rich. But it's not always fun when we feel so moment by moment dependent.
It wasn't one of those, Jesus, take the wheel. Instead of Jesus, take the car, take the road, take the map. So it wasn't one of those, please take the wheel. It's like, you keep the wheel. We're
right. We don't even want it. We don't want the wheel.
We can't drive, so we can't even spell.
It is fascinating to me because I grew up in the church and was surrounded by people who knew Jesus, and I live in a town of maybe 100,000 people-ish. And with our church, Clint and I, my husband and I, just started volunteering with a ministry that's for kids in the housing projects in our town. And I get to be the kids worship leader, which is like my favorite thing ever. But one of the songs we did was "Who's the King of the Jungle?" And you shout out Jesus, yes. And I'm like, does anyone know what that spells? And they didn't know, and the teachers are going, Jesus. And the kids are going, say Jesus. And I'm like, have you heard of Jesus before? And they're like, no. And I'm like, wow. Like, you know, and then later on, we went down and one of the teachers taught them the creation story. Have you ever heard this before? And those two girls were like, no. It is just, our world needs the message. And it is not just in countries far out that people don't know Jesus.
That's right.
It really, it shocked me. I think I still just expected that they would have heard. But why? Yeah. Why would they hear unless we tell them, right?
That's right.
Amen.
Well, what have you learned about yourself through this journey?
A lot. About how much help, how dependent we are on the Lord every minute. So, I think it's easy in the beginning to come in and think we're just going to love them and it's going to be enough. And then it's very humbling to know, like, everything that I've read and studied and done, like, it's still not enough. Like, I'm never going to find all the answers and have all the help. So I can't do that on my own. That's going to come from Christ helping me, not from all the books that I've read. So I have a tendency to research and study and talk to friends and, try to get to the bottom of it. But the most important thing, the critical thing, is going to the Lord and asking Him for guidance. And like we used to refer to it as like these light bulb moments where it was just this divine light bulb that we couldn't figure out what was going on with the kid. And then all of a sudden, God would just show us. And those moments come from God. They don't come from a textbook, even though we can be prepared. And I think that's great to do all the things and do all the trainings. But I think those moments of clarity that come just from Christ, we just have to be open to that constantly.
That's great.
Yeah, Shakespeare talks about the too sullied flesh. And so I've learned how sullied my flesh is. Just how broken and self-absorbed and how impatient I can be. And you learn this from parenting, but I feel like it turns the volume up when you're doing foster care. It's easier for me to be patient with my own children sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. How has foster parenting impacted your marriage?
Yeah, I could see, like, once, probably when we went through like our hardest placement, that we have had, we had a moment where I thought I could see like how this could destroy us. Like we just were, it was so tense all the time. And, I felt like he was losing his patience too much. He felt like I was being a pushover. It's so easy, I think, for the enemy to make it about us and for us to like put that on each other. And when it's easy to feel lonely and that you don't really want to share all that's going on in your home. So at that moment, it's just us. And I think it's easy for the enemy to say, to put us against each other. And so we learned we have got to like be on the same team. We are on the same team, like just kind of repeating that's the most important thing, that we have each other's back and that we're careful of that when we see that rise up.
Yeah. Our emotional tanks were empty. And so we didn't have anything to give one another. And we did respite and, we did the date nights, but it wasn't enough really to fill back up what those children were, what they needed. And so it's really tough. So I think marriage is tough in and of itself, but adding just that exhaustion just really takes its toll.
Yeah. And also how you guys have, like you talked about, very different ways of really looking at the world, in the sense that you said he's his calm, or he's the adventure to your calm, right? And so I am sure, I know this in Clinton, my relationship, when the stress rises up, those things that we really love about each other can sometimes be the things that we fight over that frustrate us, right? Those differences highlight.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. And for us, it's like we're not perfect. We're trying to forget what is behind and grab a hold. So anything that we are is by the grace of God. But by the grace of God, we're actually strong believers. We're mature. We're intelligent. We're all these things. And if it's that much of a struggle for us, where Christ is the center of our relationship, where we have a church community, how much more is the case? I mean, we're struggling to stay afloat with all of that. How much more is it more difficult for those who don't have that? We don't know how they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say that you have experienced more of Jesus because of foster care?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what would be some specific ways?
Well, I love what Jesus says on the Mount of Olive, the Olivet Discourse. He talks about, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in prison. And of course, the people say, Lord, when were you naked? When were you hungry? When you're thirsty? And Jesus said, what you've done for the least of me, you have done for these. And so Jesus identifies himself with those people. And so when we see these kids, we're looking at Jesus. And so it is instantiation that this is Jesus with flesh and bones right there in front of us. And so when Jesus talks about the end of Judgment Day, this is what's going to be. Did we do that? And so in that sense, we've seen more of Jesus because that they've been right there in front of us.
Wow.
And I think Jesus he's pushed us to do and handle more than we ever thought possible. And, in his grace, he didn't let us see those things before walking into them because we would have never walked in. But then we just, he continues to prove that he was with us in the fire. He is with us and we can make it through. And so it's showed us had we not been involved in foster care or adoption, we would have missed that piece of that we're capable of doing hard things. And if this is what he's calling us to do, we can do it. And it's influenced kind of how we tackle other things in life where we're now as we're parenting our bio kids who are adults, we're able to say, look what God did.
Yeah.
You can do this. We can do hard things. We've done hard things in the past. And God he walked with us. He brought us through that. And so he's going to do that again. So those stories of faithfulness, still pull us through hard things.
Yeah.
We become more charismatic. We grew up Baptist. So we don't know. We need more of the Holy Spirit to do this. Small little miracles. One experience, we had to take a child back. It was difficult, and we were just broken. And we had to get up really early and drive, 3 hours to get to this place. We didn't have any money, and so we scrounged up just pennies to buy coffee. And we actually went to this little coffee spot that gives its proceeds to the call. But they didn't know us. We didn't know them. And we pulled up and we ordered the coffee. And it was just going to be all the money that we had. And they're like, you know what? The person in front of you paid for your coffee. Oh. And we were just pulled over to and then other times where we were going through a hard time that no one really knew, we would have someone contact us and say, we had a dream about you last night, and we woke up in the middle of the night praying for you, and it might have been the time where you had to call cops to come in that they didn't even know about. And this person was in Houston, Texas, and we're in North Carolina, and just things along those lines where God just gives us these great reminders that he hasn't forgotten us and abandoned us as we're going through these great struggles with the children.
Yeah, and I think he opened our eyes to that, where maybe before this time we would have said, oh that was a great coincidence, or how cool that happened.
Yeah.
But now when those things happen, we are just oh my gosh, God, thank you so much.
Yeah.
He knew I needed that word. I needed that hug, at that moment. And so now we don't excuse any of that away because we know that God is pulling us through.
I love it. I remember a time when my husband and I were in the throes of foster care, and one of the kids came in with head lice. And we were really at that emotional tank of 0 as well. And before that, and we were expecting to go on a date, and we found lice. And I just remember calling the sitter, who was just actually a young couple from church, and saying, here's the situation. We'll try to reschedule and do it again. And I just remember her text back said, no, we're still coming. We're still coming. And I just sobbed, because it was the same thing of like, we desperately needed to get away. And for her to say, we're going to step into the mess with you. And it meant so much. And I think that's helpful for our listeners to hear, especially those who aren't in foster care, because it is not the big, massive things that you will do for those who are living it that make the difference. You listen to the Spirit and you give the hug, right? Or you write the letter, you send the Starbucks gift card or whatever, and you just don't know how that is going to impact.
That's right.
Yeah.
What is your heart for foster parents?
I want to help them. I want to provide the help that we couldn't find when we were going through. There were times when, we had never heard of attachment issues or RAD at the time. And I think there was like a chapter on that in grad school. I should have paid attention. I didn't know, and I couldn't find help at the time. So my heart is that they never feel alone. Like, I want to constantly reach out and say, how can I pray for you today? Because I just want them to know. I know from our experience of going through, there's like only so much someone can do. Like, you're in the middle of the mess, and I know that I can't go in and solve this for them or, relieve that calling. I don't want to do that, but I don't ever want them to feel alone. I want them to be free to reach out to me, and me constantly checking on them, bugging them to see if there's anything I can do or any way that I can encourage them.
I love that.
It's like the scene in Return of the King where Samwise, he can't carry the burden. And so he says, I can carry the ring, Mr. Frodo, but I can carry you. And so our heart is to carry them. We feel like the church is really good at getting people to Jesus. And then once they're with Jesus, they kind of leave them. We're not good at actually making them.
We got you to heaven, or we feel like we got you to heaven, but yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of churches have gotten to the point where they do have a heart for fostering and adopting. But once the family adopts our fosters, we kind of like move on to the next thing. And so we want to be the ones that help pick up the Frodos, that pick up the ones with these burdens and help carry them to what God has called them to do. And I think both of us, our heart for that also is for the kids in the program that have LGBTQ plus things going on. It seems like from what we've studied that there's a large population of LGBTQ plus kids in the foster care, especially here in Denver. And there are a lot of foster parents that just aren't really ready for that.
Sure.
And so Sadie does some training along those lines, and we often hear it's okay, I'm not going to foster teenagers, but it starts before puberty, many of these issues, and especially in our world. And so that's something that I feel like the church feels like if we ignore that bullet, then it's not going to come our way. But the more kids that come into our church that are foster kids and adopted kids, the more that's going to be, we're going to see those issues in our churches, and our church has to address those.
Yes.
And so,
and we have a heart to equip churches as well. Joey has a great, opportunity to have a lot of influence over a lot of pastors and youth pastors and children's workers teaching at a seminary. And so we want to provide that support for them, because your children's ministry is going to look different when you start encouraging foster care in your church. And then you want these kids coming to church, but it's going to look different in the classroom. And so we also have a heart for encouraging pastors, training them in trauma-informed ministry, and also walking with them this happened in youth. Well, I don't know how to handle this. What do I do with this child that's coming? And, and so, we've had youth pastors reach out to us that are worried that they're going to get in trouble by accepting kids that come you know, and so there's just a lot of pieces there that we want to support.
More kids with autism, you know, a lot of ASD in the foster care community, developmental issues, and on and on it goes. And so a lot of churches are like, yeah, we want to adopt. But then when these children start coming in with these issues, it's tough. What's the book that we read to our kids about the kids that come into the church and they end up bringing like a ham and lay it before Jesus? Do you remember that book?
Oh, yeah, the Christmas pageant. The greatest Christmas pageant or something like that.
Yes.
So there's like the community kids, the unchurched kids that come in and they just kind of wreck.
Are they like the Herdmans or something?
Yes, something like that. That's right. Yes. We eating all the cookies.
There's like a little old movie video of that Clint's family watched. We've all seen it. They would watch it every year. It was like a fan favorite.
Yes.
So that's a great example though.
Yeah. So when those kids come in and want to be part of the Christmas pageant, then we want to prepare that children's choir director, to know what's going on there and to create a safe space, for those kids to come.
We had a foster kid. It wasn't our kid. It was part of the call, but we were at a pretty formal Southern Baptist church, and it was a communion Sunday, which we only did once a quarter. And that's a whole theological baggage I want to get into right now. But those are fighting words. Only do once a quarter. But anyway, it was like during the worship in this room, this kid was just like running up and down around the altar, and you could see our church like, what do we do? Right before the Lord's Supper, she just comes and just like sweeps it all off the altar. So there's grape juice and crackers all over the place, and it was like panic. It was like the worst thing that ever happened to the church. But this is going to happen. You're going to have these kids that just they don't sit and wait for the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
But it may have been the most beautiful service as well. So.
Right. That's awesome, man. Are there any resources that you recommend for helping the church navigate this specifically, bringing in more kids?
There are a couple of books. I just ordered a new book, and I don't remember the author. That is Trauma-Informed Children's Ministry. That is my next thing to read, so that hopefully I can use that. And it's in here somewhere. So we don't have any great resources. We've more pulled in bits and pieces from everything that we do. We've pulled in TBRI and all the trauma-informed parenting pieces and tried to adapt that for what that could look like in a church situation. So.
Yeah.
With respect to the trans issue, Embodied by Preston Sprinkle.
I like Preston.
Because he also talks about what happens when you have a trans kid in the youth group. Do they go like on a retreat? And so it has a chapter that deals with that, pronouns and those type of things. And so that's a great resource where he gets not just in the theoretical part, but the practical aspect of the church.
That's great. Yeah, I respect him a lot and the ministry they have. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, man, you guys, this has been so fun and insightful. Is there anything else on your heart that you just want to share with our listeners?
I love what Paul says to the Thessalonians. He says, I came not just to give you my gospel, but also my life, my psuche. And I think that is the model of ministry. When we come to give these, where we bring these children into our home, we're not just giving them the gospel, we're giving them our life. But the beautiful thing is that our life is connected to that gospel. And so you can't really give the gospel without giving your psuche, but you can't really give your psuche without giving your gospel. And so for your audience, I would just encourage them to know that they are continuing the ministry of Jesus Christ and Paul by giving their lives.
Yeah, and I would say this, like what you referred to earlier, that we firmly believe that everyone can do something, whether it's, sending a Starbucks gift card to the foster parents in your church. If there are pastors listening, support your foster and adoptive families, especially those quiet ones that don't ask for support. They, from our experience, personal experience, when they get quiet, often that is when things are really hard at home. And there can be shame involved with like, I am not enough to handle these kids or handle this calling or this ministry. And do not let them walk through that alone. Like, reach out, even if it is dropping off some cookies at the doorstep. I mean, during COVID, we were home with 4 foster teens all locked in, quarantined. But we had friends who would call us and say, I just left cookies on your doorstep, and would bring little things like that. And I mean, those are just rays of sunshine and hope and that come and can bring joy in the midst of a very, hard time. And so I would say every person there's a way that you can help support kids in care and families that are taking care of them.
Sadie's working on her doctorate here at Denver Seminary, and one thing that she's looking at with her thesis is to also look at the parents who are no longer fostering. And so we do a good job of getting people to foster. We do a less good job when it comes to when they're fostering, but a lot of those parents who stop fostering, which is a great number, as you know, it's hard to get parents to foster, but it's even hard to keep them fostering. But there are a lot of those who no longer foster, who are going through their own trauma and their own wounds, and need the pastor as well in the church to come back and help them. Hey, don't feel shame because you can't do this, or we know you're having time. And so those who no longer foster often are neglected as well.
And there are a lot of ministries like Project 127 that I work with, The Call in Arkansas. Lots of states have those ministries. So if you don't know what to do or how to support, then reach out to those people, and we will help you find a way to plug in and be a part of it. So it's a very exciting ministry to be a part of, and God can use it in huge ways in your family and the lives of others. So
amen. Well, thank you so much, guys. Thanks for being on, and thanks for all that you do.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.